All right, what's going on, guys? We are now live. So this Q&A is going to be more. I'm going to start off with a little bit of an update on the Q&As that I'm going to be doing, and then I'm also going to get into some topic-specific stuff, particularly like stretch shortening cycle and tendon stiffness, which I said I was going to talk about last week in the Q&A. But just to start off with a quick update of the Q&A, so I want to start doing like one or two throughout the week with topics that are more specific and make them a little bit shorter, more concise. Like today, I just took like a one-page notes on the stretch shortening cycle and tendon stiffness, and just wanted to kind of talk about some key points from it. Not go too in depth, but just kind of cover some basic stuff, and also kind of hear from you guys if you guys have any questions on it. But then Friday, I'll still do the longer version of the Q&As where I'll answer questions that I got from the week. And then, of course, like also take you guys' questions live. But I just want to start doing one or two shorter Q&As throughout the week, just to kind of incorporate some more like diverse stuff. Like I might like start talking about nutrition more, or just more about jumping, or just more about just to get more of like a scope and talk about other topics that could be related to jumping, or topics you guys might ask me to talk about or look into, just stuff like that, and just make them a little bit shorter, so it doesn't seem like it's going on for so long. So yeah, just to start off and get into what I want to talk about today, it's going to be again the stretch shortening cycle, which I've heard that thrown around before. It's another thing about these Q&As. Like I like to look into topics where I hear something and I hear it over and over again, but then I still don't know what it means, or like what the person's talking about, and it just gets me interested every time I hear it, and I just want to like know more about it. So I've heard the stretch shortening cycle thrown around like Overtime Athletes videos. If you guys have heard of him, he's like Strength Camp. He went from like a 30-something inch vertical to a 44-inch vertical, which is pretty crazy. So I've watched some of his videos, and he's talked about it. And then another thing is the tendon stiffness. I've heard that talked about too. And then also like amortization phase, eccentric, concentric. I've heard that, kind of had an idea about it, but I just looked more into it and I'm going to talk about it more in this Q&A. So yeah, I'm just going to start off with the three parts of like the stretch shortening cycle. If you guys haven't heard of it, it's abbreviated like SSC, and it's basically like the phase of increasing force production throughout like a lift or a vertical jump. And it basically consists of an eccentric phase, which is the stretching of the muscle. Hey, what's up, Paul? Oh yeah, Chris Bernard, I think his name is. Yeah, his videos are really good. I like how informative they are. They're pretty concise, and like he just gets to the point, and he has some good workouts if you guys want to check out his video or his YouTube channel. It's pretty cool. But yeah, so you have the eccentric phase, which is basically the stretching of the muscle. Then the amortization phase, which is basically like the point, if you were going to do a vertical jump, it would be like the point where your foot is on the ground and you're basically like in an isometric phase for like, point however many seconds. And then your concentric phase, which is the shortening of the muscle, which is basically like the exploding into the jump. So what I looked into with all of these is like the different what goes into each phase. So like the eccentric, amortization, and concentric. And with the eccentric phase, that's where again you're stretching the muscle out. So that's where you're basically going to store elastic energy in your tendons as well. And then after that, you have the amortization phase, and you want this phase to be as short as possible. And again, I just want to this is going to go for like all the Q&As, everything I talk about on here. I'm going to be posting like a summary of the Q&As I do from now on, like on my Instagram, like of what we talk about, like what I talk about on here with you guys. And then also just want to point out, like, all these Q&As, like it's not about necessarily like getting everything right and talking about everything like 100% correct. It's just continuing to learn. So, if you guys have any advice, you're like, say I say something wrong or whatever, because you've heard it differently, that's good. Like, I just want to talk about it and learn more about it, because, that's the whole point of these, is just learning. It's not about being right about everything. So yeah, let's get back into this. So you have the eccentric phase, which basically you're storing elastic energy in your tendons. And then you have the amortization phase, which this phase you want to be as short as possible, which again is where your foot is like on the ground. So basically you have the stretch, and then your foot's going to be on the ground before you explode into your jump. And you want that to be as short as possible because you don't want to lose any of that energy or any of that that stored elastic strength. You don't want to lose this to the ground. You just want it to go straight into your jump. So keep that as short as possible in order to release that stored energy. And then some other stuff I learned from this is, oh yeah, Paul, I love his channel too. It's really good. Paul is talking about Overtime Athletes channel. But yeah, then you have two parts of like the muscle structure. You have and this is all I'm gonna like relate this to tendon stiffness in a study I read, and after I talk about this. But Paul said, check out Jump Science video called Jump Science Performance Window. Yeah, Paul, I've actually watched that video. I think I saw Steven Selly talk about it, and then I think like after I saw that video, I watched that video, and it's pretty interesting. I'm actually gonna kind of incorporate a little bit about like a strength, I guess if you want to say like a performance window, quote unquote, in this, and just talking about like how strength is learned. That's actually like the GTO part. It's the Golgi tendon organ, which is basically like the signaling for your muscles to just stop and like stop working because your body wants to naturally like prevent injury, prevent tearing. So if there's a high amount of force, well, I guess I'll just talk about it now. So I was going to talk about the muscle spindles first, but you have the Golgi tendon organ. Thanks for the transition, Paul, by the way. You have the Golgi tendon organ, which controls force. So basically, if you're lifting a heavy amount of weight, your Golgi tendon organ is like it's like a small tendon attached like at the bottom of your muscle, getting that correctly. But it's basically a protective mechanism to shut your muscle down when like a high amount of force is applied to it. But this can be strengthened over time. Paul said, yep, Selly got me on that too. But yeah, with the Golgi tendon organ, this is basically where like you can like learn strength or get stronger is by teaching this organ to kind of how do I say this? To kind of increase the amount of time that this organ doesn't shut your muscles off, pretty much. Because again, like what this organ is basically doing is preventing any muscle damage, any muscle injury. So if there's a high amount of force, that's the point you might just drop the weight, or you just won't continue because you'll feel like you're going to injure yourself. Like that's that organ signaling your muscles to just stop working. So you have that part of the muscle and tendon region. Then there's the muscle spindle, which that's just like a smaller control muscle that gets activated by the stretch phase of the muscle. So the big difference between the muscle spindle and the GTO is that the GTO is basically a reaction to force applied, and the muscle spindle is activated from the stretch phase. So that gets activated by the stretch, and then the response to avoid overstretching and tearing is to quickly shorten the muscle. So that's like where the concentric phase would come in, which is after the stretch in the eccentric phase. Then you have the concentric phase. So that's where the muscle spindle comes in to quickly like shorten, and that's when you get like the quick explosion into your jump. But yeah, so what I kind of learned about, sorry about the train if you guys hear it. Basically the point with this is that there's like a balance between so what you get for going live. I'm just gonna wait a second. So yeah, so basically there's a point with, so the point with these two that I wanted to kind of tie together, from watching, I actually recently watched an AthleanX video that talked about creating leverage with your workouts or with your jumping or whatever. He didn't actually talk about jumping specifically. He was more going through workouts, but I kind of connected it back to jumping. But basically how I tie these two together was that, and watching that video, is you want to create leverage, which is basically applying force in the opposite direction. That's basically with jumping, that would be like the concentric phase with the stretch, or when you're approaching your jump, you are applying force to the ground, and then that from applying force to the ground, you're taking that force and then going up into your jump. So that's how I applied the leverage that he was talking about. He was talking about like bicep curls, and like pull-ups, how you're creating leverage when you're like pulling your hands into the bar. You're creating leverage in the opposite direction by pulling down when you want to go up. So that's just like that's that's just kind of how I tied together from watching that video to actually just learning about this stuff recently. So yeah, again, the main difference between the muscle spindle though and the GTO is that the muscle spindle is a reaction to the lengthening of the muscle, and it prevents overstretching. So then you have a quick shorten, which would tie together to you going into your concentric jump phase, or then you have the GTO, which is a reaction to a high amount of force being applied, which then prevents your muscle from actually working if there's going to be too much force and actually cause your muscle to be damaged or tear. So that's just kind of a brief overview of the stretch shortening cycle. And now I read an article that actually kind of linked the stretch shortening cycle to the tendon stiffness, and what they said, or what they kind of concluded was that stiffness of the tendon structure, which I kind of figured the tendon structure they were alluding to was the muscle spindle, GTO, and just the muscle as a whole with the tendons. So they said the stiffness of the tendon structure has a favorable effect on the stretch shortening cycle due to, like I said, those two things that I was talking about. So I feel like that was just something I've been wanting to kind of learn about, talk about, and I was going to talk about tendon stiffness last week, but I did the vertical jump analysis and answered questions from that week. But again, if you guys are just joining the live stream, I'm going to be doing like a shorter version of these Q&As throughout the week and talk about more specific topics, make them a little bit shorter, more concise, keep them to about like a page summary of like stuff I learn about and look into, and then kind of give you guys like a brief overview of pretty much what it is, like what I learned from it, and also like take you guys' questions if you guys have heard about it or just want me to look more into it or learn more about it from me or whatever. But yeah, that's basically the stretch shortening cycle. And then again, I'm going to be posting like a summary of these Q&As to my Instagram if you guys haven't checked that out. It's at LikeMikeBarrins. So yeah, you guys kind of get like an overview of what we talked about in these live streams, and then I will link that AthleanX video because I think it's really interesting. Like, he did a pretty quick explanation and also kind of showed how it related to different exercises with creating leverage. Because I mean, it makes sense. Like, if you he tied it together with like physics, which basically it is physics. Like if you want to produce force in one direction, you have to produce a high amount of force in the opposite direction. So like if you want to jump or if you want to deadlift, he also used that example. If you want to deadlift, that's why they say, drive your feet into the ground, because you want to apply as much force as you can to the ground in order to get the bar up. So he talked about it as like, think of deadlifting like you're doing a leg press, not like you're pulling the bar. So I just think it was interesting to kind of look at it from that perspective. I mean, it's like all these little things, it might be like, why even talk about this stuff? It's just jumping. Like, what's the point? I just feel like it makes jumping like more interesting, and it just makes like life more interesting when you learn about like little details and stuff. But I don't know, I feel like it just makes more sense. Like, why, like for me, it's always like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing box squats, or like, why am I doing plyometrics? Like, what's the point of all this stuff? But I feel like when you get into it and then you learn about like, oh, that's why plyometrics makes sense. Because I mean, pretty much plyometrics, like a lot of them, like if you do hurdles, you're basically training to decrease that amortization phase as much as possible, because you're jumping over. I mean, the way I do them is I jump over a low box and then right over a high box. So I have to decrease the amount of time I'm on the ground in order to get over that higher box. Otherwise, if I stay on the ground too long, you get stuck, and then you could miss the higher box or just not jump at all. So that's pretty much, again, that's what I want to talk about in this Q&A. I'll be doing another Q&A like the one I would normally do Friday and answer the questions from the week. But I just wanted to do this one and make it a little bit shorter and kind of give you guys an update on how these Q&As will be. And again, if you guys have any suggestions, just let me know. But if you guys don't have any other questions, I think I'm going to end this Q&A here, and I'll be posting more. I kind of did this one kind of like spontaneously because I just wanted to give a brief update, make this one pretty short, pretty concise, and then as these go on, like I'll do more of like a I'll talk about it on my Instagram before I go live and stuff, so you guys will have a little bit more time in advance to know. But yeah, I'm gonna end this live stream here, and I want to thank you guys for tuning in. And thank you, Paul, for letting me know about that Jump Science Performance window. That was an interesting video. If you guys want to check it out, it's Jump Science. I think the video is just called, yeah, Paul said the video is just called Jump Science for Performance Window. But yeah, I'm going to end the Q&A here, the live stream here. So I will see you guys in the next live stream or in the next video.